Thank you for joining me on the continuation of this historic walk of Old Galton, Cambridge. If you haven't seen part one, you might want to zip over there to see where you can be parking the downtown core and so you wouldn't have missed anything. We're starting at the corner of Dickson and Ainslie. The Dando Block was built in 1889 and was named after the former owner, George Dando Sr. It's a Romanesque revival-style brick building. This style of building was being built in many places in the Galt downtown core between 1885 and 1895. In the late Victorian age, this building boom was making Galt look more like a sophisticated small town, instead of the settlers' town that it started out as. The Dando Block was built to house shops and services, and more than 130 years later it still does. Looking across the street, you'll see Saltzman's Dry Cleaners that was started in 1949 by Max Saltzman. He began his political career in local politics and became a federal politician in 1964. He made headlines across Canada in 1974 when he drafted a proposal to bring the Caribbean islands of Turks and Caicos into an association with Canada, as in, let's make them another province. Surprisingly, this was not the first time this has been proposed. Canadian Prime Minister Robert Borden had proposed the same thing in 1917. The building at 2224 Ainslie Street had been a furniture store for over 100 years. It was built in 1868. Originally it had been T. Little & Sons who had built and sold furniture from this site. From cabinets to coffins, in the early days Little & Sons would build you whatever you needed. It was not uncommon in early Canada that a furniture maker would also be a coffin maker, as funeral services were almost always done in the home. At the corner of Main and Ainslie is the building that used to hold Briscoe's department store. The store was established in 1892, but this building was of a later date. In this newspaper clipping from 1928, it's described as general dry goods, ready-made clothing, boots, shoes, etc. Briscoe's department store also had a bargain basement for those who loved to save $1. In a move to make this building look more modern, it was unfortunately clad with brown metal siding in the 1970s. This has been thankfully removed and the building has now had a sympathetic renovation with new and exciting shops moving in. I'm not going to take you down Main Street quite yet, but we're going to cross Main and continue on Ainslie so I can show you a National Heritage building and give you a set of wings. On the side of this lovely shop, The Art of Home, is a beautiful painting of wings that they commissioned. Steve and Sandy Pell of Pellvetica turned a rather bland beige wall into this wonderful piece of art. These are goose wings, and the background being local flora. Another great photo opportunity. Throughout Cambridge, there's many instances of street art that I'll be pointing out to you. Next door is the Armoury. The Cambridge Armoury was constructed in 1914 to 1915. The building is the home of the Highland Fusiliers of Canada, successors to the 29th Waterloo Infantry Battalion, formed in 1866, and is the property of the Department of National Defence. The front of the building looks like a fortified castle with towers, turrets, buttresses, and a stone-framed central doorway. It was built with contrasting brick and limestone. The vehicle displayed in front of the building is a light armored vehicle meant as a modern military monument with a commemorative plaque which has been installed to serve as an Afghanistan war memorial. It recognizes the service personnel who served in Afghanistan. Back to the corner, look up on the side of the building and you'll see another piece of street art, an advertisement for stoves. In 2012, 3D Artworks made a restoration of this painted-on advertising that's for a Pandora range made by McClary's. Before it had been restored, part of the ad had still been visible, but this present sign is not 100% reproduction, even though it does follow the shape and style of the original. It was deliberately made to look faded as if it was truly a ghost sign. A ghost sign is an old painted advertising sign that has slowly faded away on the building. The building that it's painted on is the 1894 Buchanan Block, 63 to 69 Main Street. Designed and built by Theron Buchanan, this was the site of Buchanan's dry good business. It's a Romanesque revival building that was one of the first to have modern iron frame construction, as you can see from the style of the second floor windows. Next to that is the second Osbourne Block, built in 1895, just 1 year after the Buchanan Block. It was built in the gap between Buchanan's building and the first Osbourne building, which was constructed 30 years earlier. This is a high Victorian Italianate style, but only the front of the building with its interesting windows and balcony is built of granite. The rest of the building is built of yellow brick. William Osbourne and David Spears are partners, and they ran a grocery and liquor business. Now, David Spears might not have gotten this building named after him, but I don't think he cared. He was the mayor of Galt at one point, and he had many other businesses, including a paper collar factory. In the 1800s to the 1920s, men's shirts were sold without collars or cuffs. Since the shirt part wasn't seen, they didn't need to be washed daily, but the collars and cuffs could get grubby pretty fast. Paper collars and cuffs, which were made from paper and cotton to look like cloth, were the answer for men who couldn't or didn't want to deal with the bother of fabric ones. It wasn't a bad business venture to set up in an up-and-coming town where young men from the farm came in to be clerks and needed to look the part. 51 to 53 is known as the first Osbourne Block. This grey granite building was built in 1865 after a series of fires in the downtown burnt down many of the wooden buildings. And it shows how 30 years earlier the main concern for a building wasn't necessarily its style, but its durability against fires. Across the street is an Art Deco building that was originally an F.W. Woolworths. It can be seen in the background of this 1945 parade. Woolworths was the original five and dime store that started in America and then branched out into Canada in the 1920s. There seemed to be a Woolworths across every town in Canada. On the death of its founder Frank Woolworths, his obituary read, "He made his money not by selling a little for a lot, but selling a lot for a little." Now the building is home to Sugar Daddies Bakery, a keto-friendly, grain-free, gluten-free, and free of cane sugar bakery. Down the street, at 3038 Main Street, is the Wilkins Block, built in 1863 for Nicholas Wilkins, a merchant tailor, which is a custom tailor who owns their own business and supplies the fabric that they use to make the clothing. While Main Street is going through a revitalization with buildings being renovated and new shops moving in, the jewel in the crown on Main Street is a store that's been in the Wilkins Block for over 120 years, F.J. Brown & Son. It's a store that offers an assortment of fine jewelry, watches, accessories, and beautiful gift items. The great-great-grandfather of the present owner, Ted Brown, was Captain Francis John Brown. Captain Brown and his son, Francis James, who is an optometrist and a watchmaker, opened F.J. Brown & Son, which featured many imported items from the exciting country of Japan, which had only recently opened itself up to Western trade. For 214 years, Japan limited trade with other countries, and nearly all foreigners were forbidden from entering Japan. Captain Brown had been employed by the Japanese Steamship Company and had sent back Japanese goods and curios from the newly opened country. Some of these items are still on display in the store, such as the Japanese spider crab that's in pride of place over the counter. F.J. Brown & Son is a wonderful place to get a special gift for a special occasion, or to treat yourself to something nice. 18, 20, and 22 Main Street is the Miller and Hugh Cant building, built in 1872. These two beautifully Italianate-style buildings were made from granite and were constructed by William Webster. They feature lovely round arch windows on the second floor with decorative metal hooded molds. The second floor used to house the White Rose Cafe, whose manager, Li Bing, survivor of the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. There were 8 Chinese passengers on the Titanic, all of them sailors. They had been working in England and reassigned to a ship in New York, chartered by the Atlantic Fruit Company, that was to sail to Cuba. They were traveling third class, and 6 of the 8 survived the sinking of the Titanic. The press treated the Chinese survivors horribly because of the racism of the day, making up stories and telling outright lies of how they managed to survive. One story that is true is one of the 6, Fang Lang, lashed himself to a floating door to save himself from drowning. Director James Cameron heard the story. He decided that's how Rose was going to survive in his movie, The Titanic. Li Bing eventually immigrated to Canada and made his way to Galt, where his uncle owned businesses and Li Bing became the manager of the White Rose Cafe. In 2021, there was a documentary made of the surviving Chinese sailors called The 6. Back across Main Street, from 13 to 39 Main Street, is a stretch of buildings that were built by the Webster brothers to replace the buildings that had been destroyed in a fire. Known as the Granite Block, built in 1851 by 6 independent merchants, it's a beautiful example of pre-Confederation architecture. It was buildings like this that led Old Galt to be called the Granite City. On the corner is the commercial building built in 1850. In 1855, there was a grand ball held on the second floor to celebrate the arrival of the first railway to Galt, the Great Western Railway. The Bank of Commerce has been in this location since the 1860s. Across the street at 8 Main Street was the Merchants Bank of Canada, built in 1918 to 1919. The bank on the final corner is the Toronto Bank. It's a unique building in Cambridge because the face of the building is done with white glazed tile. It was built between 1912 and 1913 in the Beaux Arts style. So why so many grand banks? Because banks needed to look prosperous and imposing so people would feel safe leaving their money with them. Next, I'm going to be walking down Water Street. I'm going to be showing you the results of the flood of 1974, the library that one of the richest men in the world helped finance, the story of an extraordinary train wreck, and where you can buy some of the most amazing antiques and collectibles. Join me, there's so much more.